All right, it's time to begin. Our first time back in our class on Sunday morning in 15 months, 14 months? Quite too many, right? Too many. It feels good to be back to normal. Although it does feel a little odd, doesn't it? Yeah. I had to get ready faster this morning. So my tie's crooked. And so Patrick, too, yeah. Yeah. All right, we're going to be in Judges chapter 16. Judges chapter 16. While you're turning there, I'll run through our prayer list as it's in the bulletin, and then Marshall will lead us in a prayer. If you picked up a bulletin this morning, you've got these, but I do have at least one update. Mac McCarthy's memorial service is Friday, and again, I don't know where we stand on the food prep for the family following the service, but Debbie Winkle's handling that, and so if you can help, please talk with her about that. Margaret McCarthy was placed on hospice this week, so I want to certainly keep her in our prayers. Natasha Sylvester's mother is dealing with sickness, and they're testing her to determine what's going on with her condition. Brenda's friend James Harmon has been diagnosed with esophageal cancer. Diane Haining did have her first chemo treatment this week, and it did go well. She said she was feeling okay, and I didn't write down the date. I've got it at home, but she's got her second treatment coming up shortly, so we certainly want to keep Diane in our prayers. Tony Solomon has another procedure coming up shortly. Janet Rubio's sister has been dealing with complications and unable to begin her chemo treatments yet. Natasha's brother-in-law still recovering from a bicycle accident. Vicki Wallbauer, they found a cyst recently on her brain, and they're testing her to discover what is going on with that. Rosemary LeConte continues to recover from a broken foot. John Clevenger continued to recover from a sickness. Karen Trinka's mother-in-law, Emma, has been on our prayer list and is now as being sick, and they had to make the decision this week to place her on hospice. So we certainly want to keep that family in our prayers. And Ed Beatty's friend Mariana is dealing with a significant increase in her seizures. So we want to keep her in our prayers. I also will update you because I've been keeping you updated with this. I told you that Tortola had planned on going again this fall, hadn't been there since before the pandemic, but the COVID outbreak in Tortola 2 weeks ago Friday, they had 13 cases. Last Friday, they had 421, I think was the right number, and as of this Friday, they have 850 something. Their health department is saying that if something doesn't change dramatically, that within 2 weeks, they're anticipating 5,000 cases. So if they get to that point, that is a fifth of their population, so a fifth to a sixth of the population. So you certainly keep them in your prayers. Our brethren are unable to worship at this time together, so they're joining us today on our live stream, and so certainly keep them in your prayers. Anybody else? Yes. Okay. Let me write that down. Okay. Okay.
My cousin, Sandra Preston, her husband died of cancer this week. She was raised in the church, but she is not a member.
Hold on, I'm sure you didn't hear that one. That was, Cheryl said, her cousin Sandra Preston. Her cousin Sandra Preston's husband passed away this week, and so she's requesting prayers, and she says she's not been faithful in the church for, okay. 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 Anything else? Okay, Marshall will lead us in prayer, and then we'll get started. Judges chapter 16. If you remember where we are with chronologically in the account, you know that we have been studying most recently Samson, but what we've dealt with is this cycle of oppression that occurs in Israel in different parts of the nation because of the fact that they have been in the land and they didn't do what they were supposed to do in the first place, and so they've left people there and they have been influenced and they have turned away from God's law, and in some cases they don't even know God's law so much anymore, but in some of them they knew it, they just didn't do it. And the text tells us that this all started because people started doing what was right in their own eyes. And once that starts, once you start down that path, well, it ends wherever you want it to end. It doesn't come anywhere close to God's direction. So that's where they've been. And we've gone through several of them, and the length of their oppression and the length of peace that occurred and all of that. With Samson, his account is different than the others in the sense of we don't have anybody that is in the nation that God can raise up to handle the oppression. In the others, when the people would cry out to God, he would raise somebody up to deliver them, like Gideon, put him in a position to deliver them. But then in Samson's case, it's different. In Samson's case, as the oppression is even starting, Samson's not even born. And so a messenger is sent to who would be his mother, and she is told, and she tells her husband that she is told about the fact that she's going to have a child, and this child is going to be a Nazirite from birth, meaning that he's going to have certain restrictions set upon him so that he can be committed to this task of God, and she's going to have to commit to that vow as well, as long as she's pregnant with him. And he does that, and we see him, even as he reaches the age of 20, that's when he starts this process of what we call judging Israel, but it's really, that word means delivering, right? And so it's 20 years old is when he starts delivering Israel, and he's 20 years doing that, as the text told us on Wednesday night, and we'll do that again today. But in that time frame, he's not a righteous guy. And I've tried to emphasize, even as we've gone through all of the judges, none of them are perfect, obviously. In fact, there's no character anywhere in the Bible or anywhere that you've ever met or that has ever existed who is perfect except for Jesus himself, right? But the judges, I try to emphasize the fact that the judges were not raised up because of their righteousness in most cases. They were raised up because of their ability and willingness. And so in Samson's case, the first thing we read about him after, obviously, the promise of his birth is that he sees this Philistine woman that he's very attracted to, and he turns to his father and mother and says, now go get her to be my wife. Well, they're not supposed to do that, are they? Because he's supposed to marry, all the Israelites were supposed to marry in their nation, right? And it had to do with protecting a seed line as well as an inheritance that was passing down of the land and all of that, but it was a part of the law. And the parents knew that. They even said that to him. Somebody of your own kinsman is who we're supposed to be getting for you, but he didn't listen. And so he enters into this marriage, and it's a sinful marriage. And of course, it was based off of solely attraction, so it didn't matter, didn't matter who they were to each other. And it went bad real fast, didn't it? At the feast, the wedding feast, they have a 7-day wedding feast. He tries to present his ego and supremacy over these Philistines and presents to them a riddle that's unsolvable. And they cry out to her, and she whines at him, and eventually he tells the riddle to her, she tells it to them, and that starts this big battle. So he's got to go out and kill 30 Philistines, or he does, go out and kill 30 Philistines to get the 30 changes of garments that he has to give to these 30 men. So that starts it all, and then they start escalating. Each side's got to not only get even, we've got to get ahead, and anger gets way out of control. He's so angry about the whole thing that he leaves his wife there, and she's given to somebody else, right? And then he's got to kill a bunch of people because of that and burn up all the crops, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And at this point, you would like to think somebody wakes up and says, okay, this has gone far enough, I want to do the right thing, right? But it hasn't. But I do find one thing a little bit significant in the way this has gone about, and that is the Philistines have been focused on suppressing Israel until Samson shows up, and now they just kind of focus all their energy on him. So that is a part of the deliverance. Now, we do see at one point where they send their people to Israel, and they start to oppress them just so they can get him, and the Israelites send 3,000 people to get Samson and say, we got to turn you over because they're oppressing us. But their focus was on him, right? Okay, that kind of takes us where we are today in chapter 16. Judges chapter 16. Then Samson went to Gaza. Where's Gaza, by the way? Does anybody know? I'm not talking about on a map. I'm just talking about what.
It's a major city.
It is one of the 5 major cities of the Philistines. So it is a city of the Philistines. So when you make, I don't know how to say this. Let's see. How do I want to say this? If you know you have a problem with something, is the best way to handle it to go and put yourself in a situation where you know the problem's going to be there for you? And I guess the way I would explain it is, if you struggle with alcoholism, is the best place to eat lunch in a bar? No. And when the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning when it's daylight, we'll kill him. Now, that doesn't mean they surrounded the house. It means they've surrounded the city because they're at the gate of the city, right? That's what it said. They're surrounding even at the gate of the city. So they've heard that he's here, which brings up a question for me. How would they hear that? I mean, let's say today you're going to go to Miami. Are the people in Miami going to like, oh, John's coming to Miami today. They're going to spread that news around? You could actually get into Miami and out without anybody even knowing.
Well, he's like public enemy number
One thing is, people see him when he's public enemy number 1. The second reason is, he likes to announce himself.
Oh, yeah.
He likes for people to know who he is. So if they were questioning who he is, you go into an airport, you may see a celebrity, but you're not going to know who they are most of the time, right? Because they don't want you to know. But he shows up with his gear on. He wants people to know who he is, and so they see it. He goes in to be with this harlot, and they see it, and they spread the word around, and all the men gather around the city, even around the gate. That's going to be important in a minute, because they're going to get him when he gets up tomorrow. Before he can get out of the city, they're going to finally capture Samson. So, humility is not one of his strengths. Yeah, that's certainly not one of his strengths.
Yep, had to learn for that.
Yeah. He cut his hair. Verse 3. And Samson lay low till midnight, and then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city, and the 2 gate posts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Now that's the end of that account, but it basically goes like this. They set up camp all night because they think he's going to come out tomorrow morning, so they're thinking this is easy. We'll just wait. We got all night to wait, and he surprises them. He expects this. Again, I go back to that idea of them seeing him and probably him making it known that he's there, because if he didn't do that, would he expect that there would be people waiting for him? No. So he did it knowing that they're going to set up a trap for me, and I'm going to get around it. So the way he gets around it is he wakes up at midnight and he takes the gate. And that's a great story that we tell to the kids. When you talk about Samson, you tell about Delilah, and you tell about his hair, and you tell about his death, and you tell about him carrying those gates off, right? But what does it mean? Why did God record it? It wasn't for our kids. He takes the gate post off and he carries them to the top of the hill facing Hebron.
That's a long way away.
It is a good journey, yeah. It's also something that not an ordinary person can carry.
Yeah,
Gates of a city. Yeah. Yeah.
No other man.
And that's why we teach it to our kids, because of all the strength that God gave him that nobody else had, that he was supposed to be using for God's purposes. So he carried those gates nobody could carry, and he carried them a long ways away. Now, what's it mean to us? What was the impact on that city? What did they lose? What did Gaza lose? Protection, security, safety. They think that Samson is a threat to them, so they surround him to take him away. He takes away all their security. And he takes it to where it's facing Hebron. Where's Hebron?
17 miles away.
Well, I don't want literal geographic location. Where is it? Where is Hebron? It's in Judah. It's one of the prime cities of Judah and their service to God. What you're starting to see here, and we've seen this all along, is Samson. Here's what happens with most people. You want to be faithful, right? I mean, that's why you're here. You want to worship God. You want to be a Christian, right? Okay? But out there in the world, do you ever struggle? Do you ever disappoint yourself? Do you ever think, I'm just not the person yet that I want to be? And so you have this constant battle. And sometimes people get to the place where they say, they give up. You know, I got this battle, it just doesn't go away. I haven't defeated it yet. I've been fighting this battle for years. It doesn't go away. I'm just going to give up. I do that with my diet. I get up, step on the scale. If it's too high, I go get breakfast. Just give up. Okay? Samson is I have been highlighting all of his problems, but what has happened as we've gone through this is he still has an attitude of recognizing this came from God. His purpose here is given to him by God. He hasn't cut his hair. He hadn't even told anybody about that. And it's not magical hair. It's just that was a symbol of this Nazirite vow. And yet, even as he's tried to keep some of these things, we've seen his huge struggle. Taking those gates and facing Hebron is a symbol that God's the one that's doing this. So his ego is in a battle with his knowledge of the fact that he would have no right to any ego at all had God not been the one that gave him this strength. So what we're seeing in this part of the account is that battle with himself, not with the Philistines, with himself. Of one side knowing God's the one doing it, and the other side saying, but I still want all my own things. Now, nobody here ever goes through that, do you?
So the answer is Hebron is a symbol?
The fact that he took it and put it before Hebron is symbolic, yes, I believe, of the fact that this is God doing this. Yeah. Yep. Okay, keep going. Now, afterward, it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now, most people will look at this and automatically assume she's a Philistine. Some others look at it and say this is actually a Semitic name. So maybe she's a Hebrew. I don't think it matters. I don't think she is a Hebrew because she has a significant connection to the Philistines. But I do understand the argument that people make that says if she's a Hebrew under oppression by the Philistines, then maybe she cooperates just to get benefit or something. So it's possible. I don't think it really matters what nationality Delilah is. What matters is what kind of person she is. So she's going to be just like his first wife. You know, she's going to be just like her in the sense of she's only out for himself. She does not, or herself, she does not love Samson, and she certainly doesn't love God. Verse 5. Lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Now, that's about $8,000 a person. So these are the lords of the Philistines, and there were 5. Like Gene talked about a while ago, one of the major cities of Philistines was Gaza. Well, there were 5 of them. There were 5 major cities, and there were 5 lords or kings over each one of those cities, and they very much worked together, and they have gathered together now because they've heard that Samson's found his next weakness. And they know his weakness. They know what he struggles with. They were there at the very beginning. So they know that he's somehow attached himself to Delilah, and they go up and they offer her, in our days, funds about $8,000 apiece. That's pretty significant, isn't it? Especially when you're being oppressed by this nation, so you have nothing, right? So even whether she's a Philistine or not doesn't matter here. My point is, they know her weakness. She knows Samson's weakness. They know Samson's weakness, and they're using all of this against him. Isn't that what the devil does? Okay, so Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you. Now here's a question. Anybody watch football? A few of you watch football? Yeah, okay. There's some pretty big guys that play football, right? And they're strong too, right? I mean, I read about these kids in high school that are being recruited, and they're like deadlifting 600 pounds or whatever, bench pressing 350 pounds. And I'm thinking, I couldn't do that with 10 of me. How'd they get that strong? They train. They have genetics that help, but they got to work hard, right? Okay, so have you ever thought about somebody like that that's got that kind of strength and thought, I wonder how I could take that away? And thought, maybe if I cut his hair. Maybe if I tripped them. You know, are they going to lose any strength from that?
No.
Okay, but that's what we would think if we think that there's something magical. People do that with, in fact, the devil's done that, with the plan of salvation. All right? There's something magical in that water, so we just take the water away. Is there magic in that water? No. It's just water, isn't it? It comes out of the same pipes and out of the same plant that the water at my house a couple blocks away comes from. No different whatsoever. Same as what's at your house. No, what's significant about that is the obedience to God. What's significant about Samson's hair is not that it's magical hair that makes him strong. It's that God said, do this, and I'll be with you and use you to deliver these for these people. And the way that happens is strength. So they look at this from the perspective of there's got to be something that makes his strength so much greater than all of ours. And if we can find that magical something, then maybe we can take it away. And Delilah thinks the same way they do. Same way. So she's set a trap here for him. And I got to tell you, his weakness for these women is significant. I mean, he does have a secret, doesn't he? His strength, he knows. He knows the connection to the Nazirite vow, right? So he knows that's a secret, and he can't give that secret away. And as soon as they're in this relationship, she wants to know his secret. And he has a history with people who don't do really well with his secrets. Especially women. And that doesn't raise a red flag? Keep reading. Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So his answer to the question is a lie. And there is some debate at this point by people about, is it okay for him? I mean, you can't tell her the truth, right? So it's okay for him to lie to protect it. Maybe the right thing to say is, hey, look, God gave me this strength because I've got a job to do, and I've got a secret I have to keep, and it's in God's hands, and so I've got to trust him. Maybe that's the way to go. But that's not the way it went, was it? He lied about it. Maybe he's testing her. I don't know. It is a game, yeah. So he lies to her and says, tie me up, and that'll work. So the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, and she bound him with them. And now there were men lying in wait, staying with her in the room. And she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he broke the bowstrings as a strand of yarn breaks when it touches fire, so the secret of his strength was not known. Now, you remember when I was talking about his first wife and what went on with her, one of the things that I tried to emphasize is even more apparent in this account with Delilah, and that is when somebody tells you what they are, you better believe them. Right? And I'm not talking about with their words, I'm talking about with their actions. Okay, she has immediately, just like his first wife did, she's immediately turned around, and he doesn't know she has this arrangement, at least as far as we can tell, with the Philistines, but she sends him word. Okay, all I got to do is tie him with these bowstrings. That's like animal fabric that has been woven together to make these ropes, if you will, to tie him. As soon as he tells her, apparently while he's asleep, she ties him up. She's told him who she is, and evidently he doesn't believe her. Now, I have to admit, you know this about me. Every time I study, I learn, and something has dawned on me this time studying for this class that I did not get. At least I don't remember ever getting it anytime I've ever gone through it. I've always pictured this, and we teach it in Bible classes, that what happens is he says to her, if you tie me up with these bowstrings, then I can't be bound. And so she brings the Philistines, she ties him up, brings the Philistines in, he wakes up, and there's a big battle, and then it's all over. But there isn't a big battle, is there? I don't think they're in the room. They're there. They're hiding somewhere in the house or whatever, but there's no conflict, so he never knows it. As far as I can tell in this account, he never knows it. He goes to sleep, she ties him up, she then says the Philistines are here to startle him. He wakes up and does the binding work. No, he breaks free. So for Samson, no big deal. She was testing him.
You would think, though, he would have learned from...
I'm a slow learner, but I don't think I'm that slow. Yeah. Now, keep going. Verse 10. Delilah said to Samson, look, you've mocked me, told me lies. Now please tell me what you may be bound with. So he said to her, if they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Therefore Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And there were men lying in wait, staying in the room, but he broke them off his arms like a thread. So no wife has ever done that, have they? No husband's ever done that, right? Manipulated your wife to get what you wanted. No wife's ever manipulated a husband to get what you wanted, right? Is that what happened here? Actually, the truth of the matter is I think they're both trying to manipulate. All he wants is this attractive woman. That's what he wanted the first time. That's what he wants now. All she wants is to be in control and get that money. It's all about money. Money can make you do things. Well, actually, not money. The love of money can make you do things that you would not ordinarily do. It is shocking to me how many times that I have dealt with families that have lost loved ones and seen the inheritance battle that goes on, not over big inheritances, over a few $100 sometimes. I have seen families fighting over inheritances before parents even passed away in hospitals. It's because of the love of money. Why would she? Evidently she has some kind of attraction to Samson, because this started before the Philistines ever showed up, right? Didn't they show up after they found out he loved her? And that's when they offered her the money. So what changed here was her character could be bought. So the second time, tie me up with ropes. He falls asleep. She ties him up with ropes, startles him awake again, and they bind him, right? Breaks like nothing. Okay. Surely he'd believe her the second time, right?
So she feels obligated to this $40,000.
Obligated? No. She feels entitled to, or she feels like she wants. That's it. She wants.
Call it greed.
Yeah, that would be a good word for it. Yeah, greed's going to get her to do all this. For 13, Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you've mocked me and told me lies." She knows all these are lies because it hadn't worked, right? So there's got to be some kind of secret. "Told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with." And he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom." So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he woke from his sleep and pulled out the batten and the web from the loom. 3 times. 3 times. Now, she says, you're lying to me, you don't love me, whatever. It's got to be a pleasant situation in the home. You don't love me at all, so what is it that's the secret? And this time, you know that every time that you get closer to temptation, you get closer to giving up? What you'd like to think is getting close to temptation is kind of like weightlifting or exercising. Anybody ever heard? That's probably better for me to say, exercising. Anybody ever done the couch to 5K? A couple people have. That's the guy that can't go further from the couch to the kitchen, that starts a program, and over the course of time they strengthen themselves and eventually they can run a 5K marathon, right? Okay, so we think the more we push ourselves, the stronger we get, and that works physically. Does it work with temptation? That the closer you get to the temptation without failing, the stronger you get? Or is it the case the closer you get, the weaker you get? So now he's put his hair in the mix. That's not the secret, but it's close, isn't it? She's wearing him down and he's getting closer, so he falls asleep. 3rd time now, she ties his hair into the loom. 3rd time now, she wakes him up, startles him. The Philistines are here. 3rd time now, he gets up and nothing can hold him. All right, keep reading. 15. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies." That verse is a description of far too many marriages. Far too many marriages are, you don't love me because you don't do everything that I want you to do. You don't do everything my way. Love is not based on desire. Love is a commitment. These people have no commitment to anybody or anything except themselves. He's committed to himself and his ego. She's committed to herself and her money. Keep reading. Came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death. Did the Proverbs writer say it's better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than in a home with a dripping woman or quarrelsome woman? It was like a faucet that just keeps dripping, right? This is the picture of it. She just goes on and on and on and on, and he finally gives up. That he told her all his heart, said to her, "No razor has ever come upon my head, for," this is why, "I've been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." Now here's a question. Is his hair magic? No. So what is it about his hair? It's a vow that was made to God, that his parents actually made, and he had to carry through, and he did carry through all of his life. And he's getting close to 40 years old now. All of his life, he has never had a razor cut his hair, and it wasn't because he liked long hair. It wasn't because he didn't want to cut it. It's because he said God told him. He had been a Nazirite from birth, right? So he knows the secret to his strength has to do with God. But now he's told her the truth. Yes?
Was that the only thing that he committed to in the vow? The hair?
Oh, well, there was more in the vow than that, but we don't know. There wasn't everything in it that he carried out, yes. This may be the last one.
There was the wine.
Yeah.
There was
The corpse, yeah. Yeah, this could be that may be the problem here, that this was the last one. The last one.
You have to remember, too, that this is a vow that was made between God's mother
Yeah,
instructing the child,
yeah,
and not necessarily made with Samson himself, who would have made the other commitment.
yeah.
So, not cutting his hair was between mom and God to instruct him, but all the rest of it would have had to have been a personal commitment from him, which apparently we don't have.
Well, eventually, they all had to become personal. I mean, he had to choose eventually, but you're right. The others he did not choose to keep going with. Yeah, yep. All right, now here we go. Verse 18. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." So the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. See, this time they're bringing the money because they know they've figured this out. She knows. I don't know how it was that she knew that he had told her differently. I don't understand what it was that got to this point where she believed him, because he's also told her who he is, right? When she told him she was a liar, he also told her he was a liar, right? But something's different about this time, so she calls him up. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees and called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. And then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. She tested him. She tested his strength. She didn't want to call them in because eventually these guys are going to turn on her, right? In fact, if he has told her about his past, what she knows is the Philistines killed his first wife, didn't they? And his father-in-law, because he had upped them with the anger and the getting even, and so they had to up it again. And so there is a history here, and so, she's not going to call them in and fail again. And she's tried 3 times already and didn't work. So this time she cuts his hair, and then she tests his strength. And it's gone, isn't it? It's gone. So, verse 20. She said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." So he woke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as before at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. And then the Philistines took him and put out his eyes, brought him down to Gaza. They bound him with bronze fetters, and he became a grinder in the prison. Now, I wanted to read those together because of this. He'd know about his hair. I mean, if he's never had his hair cut, it's not like, I can't tell a difference in too much when mine's been cut unless I do this, right? It's not going to be like that when your hair is hanging down half of your back. He knows his hair's gone. When he wakes up, he realizes that anyway. But what he doesn't realize is God left. When does he realize God's left? When they capture him, put his eyes out. Have they been able to do anything like that before now? No. In fact, every time they've tried in any way to capture him, he throws them off like it's nothing at all, like it's air. So now it's different. And he goes from being this man who is a deliverer by God's power to a man who is grinding the grain for the enemies who are taking the grain from your people. Why? Because God left? 22. However, the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaven. Now, that lends you to the idea, this is the way we teach it anyway to our kids. His hair grew back, so his strength came back. That makes it magic hair again. This has nothing to do, by saying here his hair started to grow back, has nothing to do with magic hair. In fact, if you're his enemies and you captured him because you know his wife cut his hair off, what are you going to do? You're going to keep cutting his hair, aren't you? If it's got magic hair, they don't worry about it because they've caught him and they put out his eyes and he's a weakling now. He can't do anything about it. He's a prisoner. His hair's going to grow. That's just a natural thing. That's not what we're being told. What we're being told is he is repenting of or regretting the decision that he made to tell his secret and lose his strength. And so now he's recognizing, I'll tell you what, there's no place better. Somebody once said, and I guess this has been repeated so many times, there are no atheists in foxholes. Because when you're in that kind of danger, you want there to be a God, right? Okay, when you go from the top of the world to the bottom of the world, you start thinking, maybe I should listen to God. How many kids move out on their own and eventually say, hey, you know what, my parents weren't as dumb as I thought they were? You hope that they all eventually do that, right? Keep going. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And that's the way these battles went. It was always their god against the other nation's god, right? So they're honoring their god Dagon, and they said, our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. So they're celebrating Samson and this victory, and they're back in power over the Israelites again. And the lords of the Philistines made it happen, so they're throwing this great feast, and all the people are now seeing the circus that is this guy that made their life miserable. And he's nothing. He is bound. He has lost his sight. He's nothing. So he's their entertainer for the night. So it happened when their hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson that he may perform for us. So they called for Samson from the prison, and he performed for them, and they stationed him between the pillars. Most of the temple-like things there would be based upon, or a foundation would be based upon two pillars that would hold up the top, and they would be kind of in the center. And then you had the foundation around that would hold up the walls. That's kind of this setting. Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars which support the temple so that I can lean on them. And now the temple was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there. In fact, there were about 3,000 men and women on the roof who watched while Samson performed. And Samson called to the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars which supported the temple, and he braced himself against them, one on his right and the other on his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead that he killed at his death were more than he killed in his life. Now, stop there. This is the only time that we have a record of in his whole life that he did something that wasn't for himself. That's the significance of saying his hair started growing back. The first time he kept his hair because he liked being Hercules, right? He liked being strong. He liked everybody looking up to him. He liked being able to handle everything. And none of the accounts that we read, when he has a problem with the 30, does he turn to God and say, hey, how do I handle this? No, he just goes and deals with it. When his wife and father-in-law are killed, does he turn to God and say, hey, let's take care of this, let's get rid of the Philistines, or does he tie the foxes together and send them out into the wheat? When he is bound, the 3,000 Jews bind him and send him, does he turn to God and say, how can I handle this? Or does he grab that donkey's jawbone and kill him? Not one time do we read about him, even though he knows his strength comes from God, not one time do we read about him turning to God and saying, how do you want me to handle this? He always deals with it himself. This time he turns to God and saying, you handle this. And he sacrifices himself. All the rest of it's been about him, what he wants, what he needs. This time it's about getting rid of the Philistines. So he says, one time, let me do this one thing. And God gives him his strength back. He pushes over those pillars. And by the way, if it was about his magic hair, why didn't he break free from the bonds when he was in the prison? Because his hair didn't grow from the time they took him out of the prison and he entertained the crowds and he stood on those pillars. His hair didn't grow anymore. It wasn't about that, was it? It was about the fact when he disobeyed the vow, which the last straw was the cutting of the hair, God left him. So in this place, at this time, he does the one unselfish act that we see in his life, and that is he sacrifices himself for the purposes of God's will and God's people. Pushes the pillars down, 3,000 people die, the Philistines, and by the way, all 5 of the lords of the Philistines are there. So the 5 kings of their major cities are all gone. They're the ones that have been leading this oppression, and it's all over. I can't help but wonder what would have been different if Samson would have been a combination of his strength and Gideon's willingness to stay true to God. I'm not saying God wouldn't have accomplished it. He did accomplish it, even without that, right? But would it have been different? I don't if somebody lives a life away from God and then they come back later in life to God or turn to Him, I'm certainly not going to look down on that. I honor that. I praise that. I think that's an incredible example, and I think it's harder for somebody later in life to change than somebody younger in life to change because they've got a lot of years of living away from God. But here's the thing. How would my life be different had I made different choices as far as God is concerned 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years, yesterday? How would tomorrow be different? That's the point of Samson. He delivers God's people from the oppression, though they had turned away from God. But wouldn't the account have been different had they or he been faithful to God in the first place?
As you were talking, I was thinking that in a way, Israel parallels the life of Samson.
They're just like him, yeah.
And the last thought is that as long as you're alive,
You can do God's will, as long as you're alive. Yep. All right, now let's read the last verse, 31. His brothers and all his father's household came down and took him, and brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel 20 years. Very sad ending to the account. We didn't even know he had any brothers, did we? Now his father is also dead. They didn't live to see the end of this, or his father didn't anyway. But they go and get in, they bury him, and that's the end of the account. But again, we point out the fact that they went 20 years of his life that he was judging Israel, and they went 40 years in oppression. All because people didn't do what God asked them to do. Okay, I've run out of time. I knew the clock was going to be my enemy this morning. Let's close with a prayer. Father, we're so thankful for the opportunity to be here today, and we're so thankful for these accounts. And we pray, Father, that we will learn the difference in what our life is when we choose to follow you versus when we choose to go our own way. Help us to have the courage, the strength, and the wisdom to follow you in your way in all that we do. Help us never to trust in ourselves. Forgive us where we fail you. In Christ's name, amen.